My name is Cheryl Hardesty. I've never done anything like this before, but out of despair, maybe if I took my story to the public, I could get help. Anyway, my life started out like many of your lives. It was not much of a life. I was abused and beaten as a child, but I was pretty determined to not let my childhood define me as an adult, and I was determined to be the best I could at whatever I did. But my life started when I got married and started having children. I married a husband that I knew was sick, and he felt nobody loved him, and I felt like it was me that would help change that I could make him see that he was lovable, despite the fact that he had a death wish. I thought maybe, things would be different. And I went on and continued to bring 6 children into the world, and not only was I a great mom for them, but the Kool-Aid mom for all the other children too. I loved being a mom. I loved doing things with my children. My children meant the world to me. So you can imagine what it was like when my second son, who was 11, when they told me that this son had contracted a deadly form of bone cancer called osteosarcoma. At that moment, we were admitted to a Kaiser hospital on the 5th floor into a ward where there were many other children. I had a very hard time watching my son and sitting by his side going through chemotherapy, the pain that he suffered. I watched children leaving body bags, their parents falling behind them, weeping and crying. And it broke my heart, and I did not want that to happen to my son. I prayed, and I went and got a blessing for my son, and I was one of the very only fortunate parents that a year later walked out with a healthy son that was destined to die, that was supposed to not live, that he did. And that's another story in itself of the chaos that's come of that. But after a year of healing, I thought it was time to get back to my life with my family and my other children. And I had taken an old boat and traded my computer services for the man across the street to fix the engine so we could go boating. And it was on a weekend. And what was about to happen changed all of our lives forever. And this is what my story is about. I got up off my knees out of my closet praying that I could bring these children back close together again. And I went down, and my 15-year-old daughter had been very troubled, me being gone for a whole year in the hospital and not having a father around to help her, as with all my other older children. I thought letting her get in the family car, a little Passat that was pretty new and tweaked, and park it in the garage would maybe frighten her spirit. So I let her get behind the wheel of that car, and not knowing what she was doing, I guided her into the garage. I lived in a 2-story house, and the wall behind me was a bearing wall of the 2nd story, and there was a doorway. Well, she accidentally punched the accelerator, and our eyes met, and the horror that was in her eyes as I heard the deafening sound of the bone crunching beneath me. I saw her jump out of the car, screaming in horror. The panic ensued with my other children. They ran screaming around. It was very graphic, as the impact was so hard that my leg literally burst, and all the pieces and fragments of tissue from between the knee and the ankle went everywhere. I told my children to call 911. I said, please. I kept my senses about me, just pleading with them to call 911. My youngest son ran to the neighbors, who fortunately were both home, and quickly stop the bleeding from my femoral artery that was bleeding out, which nearly cost me my life. I was medevaced. But the tragedy here is unlike any other tragedy, because it's not, I wasn't a victim of war. I wasn't a victim of a terrorist act. I was a victim of my own child. And to me, that's by far worse than any other type of a victim, because it's not my life, but it was her life that was destroyed. The horror that I saw as she ran down the street crying and screaming. All I wanted to do was embrace her and tell her it would be all right. I've had to keep quiet because she still suffers so much from this. I know that she suffers because I suffer. And it's a horrible thing for one of your children that's already troubled to think that she just killed her mother. That's where the tragedy begins. That's where the secrecy starts, is the fact that my own child was behind the wheel of that car. I wish it was a product of a bombing or war, that I would receive a little media attention so I could get help. But instead, life took a different turn for me as I was back to a trauma center. The doctors there did life-saving measures, replaced, I think, 9 units of blood, and kept me there to stabilize me. But Kaiser, my healthcare provider, came and whisked me away to their hospital. And during that time, Dr. Mills, one of the chief orthopedic surgeons, said he liked my attitude. I don't know how I knew about my attitude, because I was pretty much in a coma. But he said he was going to save my leg and make me walk again, despite the fact that the trauma doctors wanted to amputate. They called it nothing but hamburger left. The bone was gone. There was just this huge missing gap with just a bit of muscle lining the back, where the bumper had just scooped out all of my leg. I didn't look. I couldn't look because I didn't want to see that in my mind. But you think, after being in the hospital with my son sitting through cancer and watching so many children die, going back in the hospital was the worst possible place I could be. The pain was off the charts, and they put different devices on me, and it was completely experimental. It was completely against Kaiser's policy to perform experimental procedures. I have the handbook, it says so. And the real problem begins when I asked Dr. Mills to remove the leg. I didn't want it. The pain was too much. There was so much pain involved with it that I begged him. I filled out the paperwork. I went through the psych eval, went through their own pastor, and he even brought a man in a wheelchair wearing one of Kaiser's stick legs, saying, do whatever you can to keep your leg, don't amputate it. But for any of you out there that are considering doing a limb salvage, it will end up in amputation, and it'll make it worse. That's why the doctors, the soldiers that go to war, they have a better chance at leading a normal life if their limbs are replaced with mechanical sea legs. But my doctor was selfish. He thought that he would retire with his name in lights, with paper, and take me and publish my story and go to the glamorous conventions and tell them about how he took this missing limb and replaced it with other tissues and made this wonderful leg. But I hated it. I couldn't touch it. I couldn't look at it. I hated what he was doing to me. I was always a kind person. I was never in a hospital like that before patient. I trusted doctors, but I did not want the leg. And after dozens of surgeries, failed attempts, despite the fact that I wanted the leg gone, Dr. Mills just disappeared into the night. One night, he just was gone. He was not there. I think he was ashamed of what he had done and could not stand turning me over to another doctor to see what he had done to me. And that's why he just disappeared and went into oblivion. I'd really like him to take responsibility for how he has destroyed my life, putting me in a cast for years. People think 6 weeks is bad. Try being in a full-length cast for years. And the pain that I went through, all in the name of a science project for Dr. Mills, which Kaiser spent hundreds and hundreds of thousands, nearly $1 million on letting him do a limb salvage. So as soon as he was gone, I went to one of his colleagues that helped him and said, I want my leg gone. I said, no, I don't want it anymore. It doesn't belong to me. I'm in too much pain. And this doctor and I argued because he wanted to do what was called a knee dysartic. He wanted to go through the knee, and I said, no, please go above the knee. I don't want to risk another amputation. And I even had him running the paperwork before I went into surgery that I wanted the above knee. But again, the selfish doctors that are there at Kaiser, which is just a warehouse of bad doctors and new doctors, decided it would be his way. So when I came out of surgery, screaming and writhing in pain that no one can begin to imagine, the pain that this cost me, he had done the knee disarticulation. And I was in pain after that. I couldn't walk. I went to the doctors they appointed me to with long waits in between, suffering. And I finally, somebody paid for me to go out of state to Dr. Doug Smith, who wrote a 6-page letter to Kaiser of why I needed to have this redone. Because Kaiser wouldn't have done it on their own. They're so stubborn. They wanted to just save money. In fact, when I asked to let Doug Smith do the surgery, they denied it. And I found out that they get incentives for these denials. Save money for Kaiser, hooray. But we don't care about the life of the being we're operating on. In the meantime, Dr. Homestetter said right in front of me, and the person that was with me, that he blew it. He knew he had done a really bad thing and blew it. And being naive and not understanding the world of medicine, you know, that leg had healed, and a very kind benefactor purchased a sea leg for me, because the stick that Kaiser provides, of course she'll fail walking with that. It's almost impossible to walk on. So a year later, Kaiser finally did the second amputation by a doctor again that they chose, that admitted that he didn't know how to fix all the nerve damage. I had what are called neuromas. They're active nerves that are on all the time, causing a great deal of pain, so that I take oxycodone around the clock, which also dulls your senses. It makes you tired. It pretty much destroys who you are. But what choice do I have, to live in pain or take the oxycodone? So Dr. Zollman said that he did the best he could, knowing what little he knew about how to repair damaged nerves. And again, the pain became worse and worse and grew, and I went to dozens of Kaiser doctors. Instead of making a phone call asking them, you know, can you do this surgery? Because I went to a company called Best Doctors who devised a surgical plan to remove the neuromas and how to do it, and they outlined that. And rather than just making a phone call, I had to go see the doctors and sit there. They just looked at me and said, I don't know how to do that. And I'd pay my co-payment and spend hours on the road. And this happened dozens of times. They are relentless. They even charged me a co-payment when a doctor came into the waiting room just to apologize for having me come out, because he had told them that he couldn't help me, a referring doctor. And the Kaiser, when I told them and wrote them a letter, they just said, well, he saw you, so you owe the co-payment. I mean, they're ridiculous. One doctor even wrote that I didn't have neuromas. He was a hand specialist, and yet I could clearly see them. We did an ultrasound, and the neuromas were as big as life. The ultrasound could document them very easily. But when this doctor told the administration I didn't have neuromas, they decided that I wasn't going to get any surgery. But they were documented. There was no denying. There were pictures of them. So anyway, I guess I should begin part 2 of my journey, because I don't know how much YouTube will let you use. So let me begin part 2.